I found my stepmother throwing my late mother's wedding dress in the trash. And what I discovered about her will shock you deeply. She wasn't just throwing away a dress. She was hiding evidence of something much more sinister, something that will leave you speechless. But before we reveal the devastating secret that destroyed Linda's perfect life, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of the incredible true stories we share here. Having you here is very important to us. Thank you for being part of our community. Now, let me tell you how I discovered the horrifying truth about the woman who lived in my mother's house. The desert heat hit me like a wall as I stepped off the plane at Phoenix Sky Harbor, my Northwestern University sweatshirt suddenly feeling suffocating in the Arizona sun. 4 years of college had changed me, but coming home always made me feel like that lost 17-year-old girl who'd watched cancer steal her mother away piece by piece. Dad's texts had been increasingly enthusiastic about this visit. Linda's second wedding anniversary was tomorrow, and he wanted the whole family together to celebrate their perfect life. The phrase made my stomach turn, not because I begrudged Dad his happiness, but because something about Linda had always felt wrong to me. She was too perfect, too eager to replace Mom's memory with her own version of family bliss. I'd learned to keep my concerns to myself after Dad made it clear that any criticism of Linda was unwelcome. But the feeling never went away. It lived in my chest like a constant ache, a warning I'd been trained to ignore. As I collected my luggage, I wondered if this trip would finally give me answers to questions I'd been afraid to ask. Dad was waiting at baggage claim with that same proud smile he'd worn at my high school graduation, before everything changed. At 51, Robert Patterson still looked like the man who'd swept my mother off her feet 25 years ago, though grief had added silver to his temples and lines around his eyes. "Emma Claire, there's my college graduate," he said, pulling me into the kind of bear hug that made me feel safe and protected. For a moment, we were just father and daughter again, uncomplicated by the woman who'd inserted herself into our lives during our most vulnerable time. But even as I hugged him back, I could smell Linda's expensive perfume clinging to his shirt, a reminder that our family of two had become something else entirely. "Linda's been cooking all day," he said as we walked toward the parking garage. "She's so excited to show you the renovations we've done to the house." The casual mention of changes to Mom's house made my chest tighten, but I forced a smile and nodded. The drive through familiar Phoenix streets felt like traveling through a museum of my childhood, every landmark triggering memories of Mom. There was the park where she'd taught me to ride a bike, the ice cream shop where we'd celebrated my acceptance to Northwestern, the hospital where she'd fought her final battle against cancer. Dad filled the silence with updates about Linda's nursing career at Phoenix General, how proud he was of her dedication to helping families through medical crises. The irony wasn't lost on me that Linda worked with dying patients, given how quickly she'd appeared in our lives after Mom's death. She has such a gift for comforting people during their darkest moments, Dad said, his voice full of admiration. I don't know what I would have done without her these past few years. I stared out the window, watching the desert landscape blur past, and wondered if Dad would feel the same way if he knew that Linda had been there during Mom's darkest moments too. As we pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, I felt that familiar mix of comfort and loss that came with returning to a place that was supposed to be home but no longer felt like it. The house looked different. Linda's touch was everywhere in the perfectly manicured landscaping and the fresh coat of paint that had covered the soft yellow Mom had chosen. Even the front door was different, replaced with something more modern and expensive that screamed Linda's taste rather than Mom's warmth. Dad carried my bag up the front steps, chattering about Linda's plans for the anniversary party and how much she was looking forward to having me home. But something felt off about the energy of the house, like a chord played slightly out of tune. The familiar scent of Mom's rose garden was overpowered by the harsh chemical smell of new paint and industrial-strength cleaning supplies. It was as if the house itself was being systematically stripped of its original identity. "Linda, honey, Emma's here," Dad called as we entered the foyer, but there was no immediate response. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Dad set down my bag and looked around with confusion. "She must be in the backyard, setting up for tomorrow," he said, but I could hear uncertainty in his voice. The house felt too quiet, too sterile, like a model home rather than a place where people actually lived. Gone were Mom's family photos from the hallway table, replaced by generic art pieces that could have come from any furniture store. The living room where Mom and I had spent countless hours reading together now looked like something from a magazine. Beautiful, but cold. Perfectly arranged, but somehow lifeless. Every surface gleamed with the kind of artificial perfection that suggested someone was trying very hard to create an image rather than a home. We found Linda in the backyard, standing over several large trash bins with her back to us. She was wearing designer jeans and a crisp white blouse that probably cost more than most people's grocery budget. Her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail that somehow never had a strand out of place. "Linda," Dad called, but she seemed startled by our voices, spinning around with a guilty expression that she quickly covered with her trademark brilliant smile. "Robert! Emma! You're early!" Her voice had that artificially bright quality that I'd come to associate with performance rather than genuine emotion. But what caught my attention wasn't Linda's reaction. It was what I could see behind her in the open trash bin. White fabric spilling over the edges, delicate lace catching the afternoon light, pearl buttons scattered like tears among the garbage. My heart stopped as I recognized the unmistakable details of my mother's wedding dress. The most precious thing she'd left behind, crumpled and discarded like it meant nothing at all. The sight hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath and making my knees weak. That dress represented everything beautiful about my parents. Love story. The young couple who'd promised to love each other forever. The woman who'd worn it with such joy and hope for the future. Mom had shown me that dress 100 times, telling me stories about her wedding day and promising that someday it might be mine. And now Linda was throwing it away like garbage, erasing another piece of my mother's legacy with the same casual cruelty she'd shown since the day she'd moved into our lives. The symbolism was too obvious to ignore. Linda wasn't just discarding an old dress. She was making a statement about her place in this house and this family. She was declaring that Mom's memory had no place in her version of our story. That everything beautiful from our past needed to be eliminated to make room for her future. As I stared at that crumpled white fabric among the coffee grounds and kitchen scraps, I realized that this moment was going to change everything between us forever. What are you doing with my mother's dress?" The words came out as barely a whisper, but they cut through the afternoon air like a blade. Linda's perfect smile faltered for just a moment, a crack in the mask that revealed something cold and calculating underneath. But she recovered quickly, tilting her head with that practiced expression of confusion that I'd seen her use whenever she was caught in an uncomfortable situation. "Oh, sweetie, you startled me," she said, moving to block my view of the trash bin with her body. "I was just doing some spring cleaning. You know how cluttered closets can get over the years." The casual dismissal of my mother's most precious possession as clutter made my hands shake with rage. I pushed past her and reached into the trash bin, my heart breaking as I pulled out the dress that had been carelessly shoved between banana peels and yesterday's newspaper. The delicate fabric was stained and wrinkled, but thankfully not beyond salvation. As I held it against my chest like a shield, I could feel Mom's presence in the silk and lace, a tangible connection to the woman Linda was trying so hard to erase. "Put that back, Emma." Linda's voice had dropped to a tone I'd never heard before, sharp, commanding, and completely devoid of the warmth she usually performed for Dad's benefit. "That dress has been taking up valuable space for too long. Your father and I need that closet for our things now." The entitlement in her voice was staggering, but it was the possessive way she said "our things" that really got to me. This had been Mom's house first, filled with 20 years of memories and love, and Linda had been here for barely 2 years. Yet she spoke as if she had every right to erase my mother's existence to make room for her own vision of family life. Dad appeared at that moment, drawn by the tension in our voices, and his face went white when he saw me holding Mom's wedding dress. "Linda, "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled but with an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite identify. Was it suspicion? Or just confusion at finding his daughter and wife in what was clearly a confrontation? "It was just a misunderstanding," Linda said quickly, her voice returning to its usual honey-sweet tone as she turned toward Dad. "I was cleaning out the guest room closet and some things got mixed up with the donation pile. Thank goodness Emma found it before the garbage truck came." The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly that I almost admired the performance. Almost. But I had seen her deliberately shoving the dress deep into the trash, had watched her look around to make sure no one was watching before she tried to destroy it. This wasn't a mistake or a mix-up. It was a calculated attempt to eliminate the last tangible reminder of the woman whose place she'd taken. Dad's relief was visible as he accepted her explanation, reaching out to touch the dress with reverent fingers. "Your mother looked like an angel in this dress," he said softly, and I watched Linda's face darken with an emotion that looked suspiciously like jealousy. Even 4 years after Mom's death, she couldn't stand hearing Dad speak lovingly about his first wife. That evening, dinner felt like a performance where everyone was playing a role they didn't quite believe in. Linda had prepared Dad's favorite meal, pot roast with all the fixings, and she served it with the kind of domestic perfection that felt more like a demonstration than genuine care. She touched Dad's arm at exactly the right moments, laughed at his stories with precisely timed enthusiasm, and asked me questions about college that seemed designed to show what a caring stepmother she was rather than genuine interest in my life. But I was watching her differently now, seeing the calculation behind every gesture. When Dad excused himself to take a work call, Linda's mask slipped again. "Emma, I think we need to have a conversation about boundaries," she said, her voice low and threatening. "This is my home now, and I won't tolerate you undermining my authority or making me look bad in front of your father." The fact that she called it my home rather than our home told me everything I needed to know about how she really viewed our family dynamic. "You threw away my mother's wedding dress," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the anger coursing through my veins. "How exactly am I the one crossing boundaries here?" Linda's eyes flashed with something dangerous, and for a moment I saw past the perfect wife act to the woman underneath. "Your mother is dead, Emma. She's been dead for 4 years, and it's time for you and your father to stop living in the past." The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking, but it was also revealing. This wasn't about closet space or spring cleaning. This was about Linda's deep-seated resentment of a woman she'd never met but could never compete with. "Robert loves me now. We have a beautiful life together, and I won't let you ruin that with your childish attachment to old things." The way she dismissed Mom as old things made my stomach turn, but it also clarified something important. Linda didn't just want to be Dad's wife. She wanted to completely replace Mom in every way, to rewrite our family history with herself as the only woman who mattered. As the evening wore on, I found myself studying Linda with new eyes, noticing things I'd overlooked before. The way she monitored Dad's reactions to everything, adjusting her behavior based on his responses. How she steered conversations away from any mention of Mom or our life before she arrived. The subtle ways she'd changed the house, removing family photos and replacing them with pictures of her and Dad, as if our family history had begun the day she walked into our lives. Most disturbing was how she watched me when she thought I wasn't looking, her expression calculating and cold, like she was trying to figure out how much of a threat I posed to her carefully constructed world. I realized that Linda wasn't just threatened by Mom's memory. She was threatened by me too, by my ability to remember what our family had been like before she arrived. I was a living reminder that Dad had loved someone else first, someone better, and that knowledge made me dangerous to her. That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom staring at Mom's wedding dress, which now hung carefully in my closet like evidence of a crime. The more I thought about Linda's behavior, the more questions began forming in my mind. How had she and Dad really met? Why had she been so eager to marry a grieving widower with a teenage daughter? What had happened to all of Mom's other belongings that had mysteriously disappeared over the past 2 years? Linda's reaction to being caught with the dress had been too extreme, too vicious for someone who was simply cleaning closets. There was something deeper going on here, something that went beyond normal step-family tensions or jealousy over a deceased wife. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out who Linda Henley Patterson really was and what she was hiding beneath that perfect mask. Because if she was willing to throw away something as precious as Mom's wedding dress, what else might she be capable of destroying? Sleep eluded me that night as questions churned in my mind like a storm system gathering strength. By 3 a.m., I gave up trying to rest and crept downstairs to Dad's home office, the one room in the house that Linda hadn't completely redesigned. Dad had always been meticulous about keeping records, and if there were answers to be found about Linda's past, they would be here among his carefully organized files. The small desk lamp cast long shadows across the room as I began my search, looking for anything that might give me insight into the woman who'd inserted herself so seamlessly into our grief. What I found buried behind insurance papers and tax documents would shatter everything I thought I knew about my mother's death. A manila folder labeled Claire's medical records contained documentation that raised more questions than it answered. According to these records, Mom's condition had been stable for weeks before her sudden decline, with her oncologist expressing cautious optimism about her response to treatment. But something had changed dramatically in her final 2 weeks, and the medical notes reflected genuine confusion about her rapid deterioration. Linda's name appeared throughout the nursing documentation, which struck me as impossible since she supposedly hadn't met Dad until 6 months after Mom's death. Patient seems disoriented about medication schedule. Nurse L. Henley provided assistance with evening doses. The name jumped off the page like an accusation. Linda Henley. Her maiden name before she became Linda Patterson. She'd been there in Mom's hospital room during those final crucial weeks when everything went wrong. The timeline I'd been told about their relationship was a complete fabrication. They hadn't met at a coffee shop during Dad's grief. She'd been part of Mom's medical team, watching her suffer while somehow insinuating herself into Dad's life. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that it took my breath away. Every story Linda had told about their meet-cute romance had been a carefully constructed lie designed to hide the truth about when and how she'd really entered our lives. But why would she lie about something like that unless she had something much darker to hide? The deeper I dug into the medical records, the more disturbing the pattern became. Multiple nursing reports documented medication errors and scheduling confusion during Linda's shifts specifically. Mom's pain medication had been repeatedly delayed or missed entirely, causing her to suffer through nights of excruciating agony. Her anti-nausea drugs had been forgotten so often that she'd stopped eating, accelerating her physical decline. One senior nurse had even filed a formal complaint about Linda's concerning pattern of oversights and unprofessional conduct with patient families. The complaint described Linda spending excessive time with Dad during visiting hours, offering comfort and support that went beyond normal nursing protocols. It painted a picture of a predator who'd identified a vulnerable target and systematically positioned herself to take advantage of his grief. Each missed medication dose, each night Mom suffered unnecessarily, had been orchestrated to weaken her while strengthening Linda's bond with the man she'd chosen as her ticket to a better life. But the most damning evidence was hidden in the autopsy report, a document I'd never seen because Dad had handled all the arrangements during his grief. The toxicology findings showed something that made my hands shake so violently I could barely hold the papers. Elevated levels of morphine in Mom's system, not lethal amounts, but dangerous concentrations when combined with the malnutrition and dehydration caused by missed medications. Someone had been giving her extra doses of pain medication while simultaneously withholding the supportive drugs that would help her body process it safely. The result was a cascade of organ failures that appeared natural, but had actually been hastened by deliberate medical sabotage. Linda hadn't just neglected Mom's care. She'd actively accelerated her death through a combination of overdosing and underdosing that would be nearly impossible to detect without careful investigation. The woman sleeping in Mom's bed had murdered her to clear the path for her own ambitions. I sat in that dark office until dawn, photographing every page of evidence with trembling fingers. Linda had been too arrogant to destroy these records, probably thinking Dad would never look through them carefully. Maybe she even got some sick satisfaction from keeping trophies of her crime, tangible proof of how clever she'd been. But her overconfidence was about to become her downfall. As the Arizona sun began to rise over the desert, I realized I was holding evidence of premeditated murder disguised as medical negligence. Linda hadn't just stolen Dad's heart during his most vulnerable time. She'd created that vulnerability by systematically killing the woman he loved. Every tender moment they'd shared, every comfort she'd provided, every step toward their relationship had been built on the foundation of murder. And tonight, at their anniversary celebration, she was planning to toast the success of her ultimate deception while standing in the garden where Mom had once grown roses. The weight of what I'd discovered felt crushing as I carefully returned the files to their original positions. How could I tell Dad that the woman he loved, the woman who'd saved him from his grief, was actually the one who'd caused it? How could I destroy his happiness with the truth about Linda's monstrous betrayal? But then I thought about Mom lying in that hospital bed, suffering through nights of unnecessary pain while her killer whispered poison in her husband's ear. I thought about the wedding dress Linda had thrown away like garbage, and all the other pieces of Mom's life that had mysteriously disappeared over the past 2 years. Linda had been systematically erasing Mom's existence, confident that her secrets were safe, because who would suspect a grieving widower's angel of mercy of being a murderer? But she'd underestimated me, underestimated a daughter's love and a woman's intuition. Tonight, at the party she'd planned to celebrate her triumph, I was going to expose Linda Henley Patterson for exactly what she was, a killer who'd built her happiness on my mother's grave. As I climbed the stairs back to my room, I caught a glimpse of Linda through her partially open bedroom door. She was sleeping peacefully beside Dad, her face relaxed and innocent in the morning light. But I knew now that beneath that serene expression lay the mind of a calculating murderer who'd played the long game to perfection. She'd identified Dad as her target, positioned herself as Mom's caregiver to gain access and trust, systematically weakened Mom through medical sabotage, and then swooped in to comfort the grieving widower she'd created. It was a plan that required patience, intelligence, and a complete absence of conscience. And it had worked perfectly for 2 years, until the day she got careless with a wedding dress and revealed her true nature to the one person who would never stop fighting for Mom's memory. Tonight, Linda's perfect world was going to come crashing down, and I was going to make sure that Mom finally got the justice she deserved. The morning of Linda's anniversary celebration dawned clear and hot, with the kind of relentless Arizona sunshine that seemed designed to expose everything hidden in shadow. I watched from my bedroom window as caterers arrived to transform our backyard into Linda's vision of perfection. Elegant tables draped in white linens, strings of lights that would create a romantic glow after sunset, and enough champagne to toast what everyone believed was a beautiful love story. Linda flitted between the workers like a director orchestrating her masterpiece, every detail carefully planned to reinforce the image she'd crafted of the devoted wife who'd brought happiness back into a grieving man's life. But I knew the truth now, and every smile on her face felt like a mockery of my mother's memory. The medical records were safely hidden in my purse, along with printed copies of every damning piece of evidence I'd discovered. Tonight, Linda's carefully constructed world was going to implode in front of everyone who mattered to her, and the foundation of lies she'd built our family on would finally crumble into dust. Dad found me in the kitchen around noon, his face glowing with anticipation, and what I now recognized as the happiness of a man who believed he'd found love after loss. "Emma, sweetheart, you've been so quiet this morning. I hope you're not feeling overwhelmed by all the party preparations." His concern was genuine, but it made my heart ache knowing how devastated he was going to be when I revealed the truth about the woman he'd trusted with his heart. Linda's been planning this celebration for months, he continued, pouring himself coffee with hands that shook slightly. A nervous habit he'd developed since Mom's death that Linda claimed to find endearing. She wanted everything to be perfect, to show our friends and family how grateful we are for this second chance at happiness. The phrase, second chance, hit me like a slap, knowing that Linda had engineered Dad's need for that chance by destroying his first one. But I forced a smile and nodded, playing the role of supportive daughter one last time before everything changed forever. By 6 o'clock, guests had begun arriving for what they believed was a celebration of true love conquering grief. I recognized many of the faces, Dad's colleagues from the engineering firm, neighbors who'd known our family for decades, and even some of Mom's old friends who'd somehow convinced themselves that Linda was a worthy successor to the woman they'd once loved. Linda held court near the rose garden, radiant in a silver cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She looked every inch the perfect wife, graciously accepting congratulations and telling the story of how she'd rescued Dad from his loneliness. But I could see the calculation behind every gesture now, the way she monitored reactions and adjusted her performance accordingly. Every laugh was timed for maximum effect, every touch designed to reinforce the image of a woman deeply in love rather than a predator who'd successfully captured her prey. As I watched her work the crowd, I realized that Linda wasn't just a killer, she was a master manipulator who'd turned murder into a romantic fairy tale. The most painful part was watching Dad beam with pride as Linda charmed their guests with stories of their courtship. He truly believed that she'd saved him from the darkness of grief, that their love was a testament to the healing power of finding someone who understood loss. He had no idea that the woman beside him had created his loss, that every moment of comfort she'd provided had been purchased with Mom's suffering. Linda has such a gift for healing broken hearts, I heard him tell one of his friends. She knows exactly what families need during their darkest hours because she's dedicated her life to helping people through medical crises. The irony of praising Linda's medical expertise, the very skill she'd used to murder Mom, was so bitter I had to excuse myself before I said something I'd regret. But as I walked through the house that had once been filled with Mom's laughter, I steeled myself for what was coming. In a few hours, Dad's illusions would be shattered, but the truth would finally set us free from Linda's web of deception. When Linda called for everyone's attention at 8 o'clock, the golden hour light was casting everything in a warm glow that made the gathering look like something from a romance novel. She stood beside Dad with her arm linked through his, looking every inch the devoted wife celebrating a milestone anniversary. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate Robert and me," she began, her voice carrying across the yard with practiced ease. But as she launched into her carefully rehearsed speech about fate and second chances, I noticed something different in her demeanor. There was a tension around her eyes, a tightness in her smile that suggested she was more nervous than usual. Had she sensed something was wrong? Did she suspect that I'd discovered her secrets? The thought that Linda might be onto me sent a chill down my spine, but it also strengthened my resolve. If she was getting ready to run or cover her tracks, tonight might be my only chance to expose her. 2 years ago, I was blessed to meet the most wonderful man during one of the darkest periods of his life, Linda continued, her voice dripping with false emotion. Robert was grieving the loss of his beautiful wife Claire, and I felt so honored to be able to provide comfort during that difficult time. The lies came so naturally to her that I almost admired the performance, but knowing the truth made every word feel like acid on my skin. She was standing there in front of 30 people, telling them how she'd helped Dad through his grief, while hiding the fact that she'd caused it by murdering his wife. The audacity was breathtaking, but it was also going to be her downfall. As Linda described their chance meeting at a coffee shop and their slow journey toward love, I felt the weight of the medical records in my purse, like evidence in a courtroom. Soon, everyone would know that the only thing Linda had provided during Dad's darkest time was the darkness itself. When Linda finished her speech and raised her champagne glass for a toast, I knew it was time. I stood slowly, feeling 30 pairs of eyes turn toward me with curiosity and expectation. "I'd like to say something too," I announced, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet patio. Dad smiled encouragingly, probably expecting a touching tribute to the woman who'd brought happiness back into his life, while Linda's smile faltered slightly at the edges. But she maintained her composure, probably thinking I was about to deliver some generic stepfamily speech about finding peace with their relationship. If only she knew that I was about to deliver something much more devastating, the truth about who she really was and what she'd done to earn her place at this table. As I looked out at the gathered faces, all of them believing they were celebrating love's triumph over loss, I prepared to shatter their illusions and expose the monster hiding behind the perfect wife's mask. 2 years ago, our family gained someone new, I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. But what I discovered yesterday was that Linda didn't enter our lives when we thought she did. She didn't meet my father at a coffee shop 6 months after my mother died. The effect was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips, and every eye in the yard fixed on me with sudden, sharp attention. Linda's face went from sun-kissed bronze to paper white, but she maintained her composure, probably still thinking she could explain away whatever I'd discovered. Dad's confusion was written clearly across his features, and I could see him trying to make sense of what I was saying. Linda met my father in my mother's hospital room, where she was working as a nurse during Mom's final weeks of cancer treatment. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the fountain gurgling in Mom's rose garden, a sound that seemed to underscore the gravity of what I was revealing. But I wasn't finished, not even close. I pulled out the printed medical records, holding them up like evidence in a courtroom. These are Mom's hospital records, which show a disturbing pattern of medical negligence during Linda's shifts. Missed medication doses, delayed treatments, and unexplained deterioration that multiple nurses flagged as concerning. Dad's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the patio stones with a sound like breaking hearts. But I pressed on. My mother died 3 weeks sooner than expected because someone was systematically sabotaging her care, allowing her to suffer through nights of unnecessary pain while positioning themselves as the person my father turned to for comfort. Linda opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time since I'd known her, she was speechless. The gathered guests looked between Linda and me with growing horror, beginning to understand the implications of what I was revealing. Several people had already pulled out their phones, though whether to call for help or document this moment, I couldn't tell. "You're lying," Linda finally managed, her voice cracking with desperation. "Emma's always resented me, always tried to come between Robert and me. She's making this up because she can't accept that her father has moved on." But her protests sounded hollow, even to her own ears, and the panic in her voice only made her appear more guilty. Dad was staring at the medical records in my hands, his face cycling through disbelief, dawning comprehension, and finally, a rage so pure and devastating that several guests stepped backward. "Linda," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly across the silent patio. "Is this true? Were you there when Claire was dying?" The question hung in the air like an executioner's blade, and I watched Linda's carefully constructed mask finally begin to crumble. She looked around the gathering desperately, searching for allies or escape routes, but found neither. Her 2 years of playing the perfect wife had evaporated in the span of 10 minutes. The sound of sirens in the distance punctuated the shocked silence as someone called 911. Linda's panic became complete as she realized that this wasn't just social humiliation. This was potential criminal prosecution for murder. "This is insane!" she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You can't prove anything." Those records could be fake. But even as she protested, I could see in her eyes that she knew it was over. The evidence was too comprehensive, too detailed, too damning to dismiss as a fabrication. And her own reaction, the immediate panic, the desperate denials, the way she'd gone from composed hostess to cornered animal in minutes, was confirming every accusation I'd made. Dad was reading the medical records now, his hands shaking as he recognized the pattern of negligence that had hastened his wife's death. "You killed Claire," he said, his voice filled with a certainty that made Linda flinch. "You sat by her bedside, held my hand when I cried, comforted me when she was in pain, and you were the one causing that pain." When Detective Morrison arrived with backup, he found a scene that looked more like a crime scene than an anniversary party. Guests huddled in small groups, whispering among themselves as they waited to give statements about what they'd witnessed. Dad sat at one of the decorated tables with his head in his hands, looking like a man whose entire world had collapsed around him. And Linda stood in the center of it all, still in her silver cocktail dress, as the detective read her rights. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was being arrested in the same backyard where she'd planned to celebrate her triumph over my mother's memory. As they led her away in handcuffs, she turned back to look at Dad one last time. "Robert, please, don't let them do this to me. You know I love you." But Dad couldn't even look at her anymore. The woman he'd thought he loved had never existed. She'd been nothing more than an elaborate performance designed to hide a killer who'd destroyed his family to build her own twisted version of happiness. The legal proceedings that followed captured national attention as the Black Widow nurse case. Linda Henley Patterson became the face of medical murder, a cautionary tale about trusting someone without truly knowing them. The prosecution built their case around the medical records I'd discovered, bringing in expert witnesses who testified about the deliberate pattern of negligence that had accelerated Mom's death. Linda's defense tried to paint her as a dedicated nurse who'd fallen in love with a patient's family, but the evidence was overwhelming. Text messages between Linda and Dad during Mom's treatment revealed how she'd been manipulating him emotionally while systematically weakening his wife. Former colleagues testified about Linda's obsession with wealthy, grieving men, and her pattern of positioning herself as their savior. When the jury delivered their verdict of guilty on charges of second-degree murder and conspiracy, I felt a weight lift from my chest that I'd been carrying for 2 years without even realizing it. In the months that followed, Dad and I began the slow, painful process of rebuilding our relationship and our family's truth. We restored Mom's photos to their rightful places throughout the house, brought her belongings out of storage, and most importantly, we had her wedding dress professionally cleaned and preserved in a place of honor. The house feels different now, lighter somehow, as if Linda's toxic presence had been poisoning the very air we breathed. Dad is seeing a therapist to work through the guilt and trauma of having been so completely manipulated, and while the healing process is far from over, we're finally free to grieve Mom properly and remember her without the shadow of her killer lurking in our lives. Sometimes I still wake up angry about the 2 years we lost to Linda's deception, the family gatherings that were tainted by her presence, the way she almost succeeded in erasing Mom's memory completely. But then I think about that moment when I found Mom's wedding dress in the trash, and I know that Mom herself guided me to uncover the truth. Linda thought she could rewrite our family's story, but love, real, authentic, eternal love, is stronger than any lie a killer can tell.